And the Oscar goes to Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer.
With 12 feature films and over $6 billion grossed at the box office, Christopher Nolan's almost 30-year-long career as a writer, director and producer could fairly be categorised among the most successful in history.
Movies are just a little bit over 100 years old. I mean, imagine being there 100 years into painting or theatre. We don't know where this incredible journey is going from here, but to know that you think that I'm a meaningful part of it means the world to me. Thank you very much.
While I wouldn't personally consider him to be one of my favourite writer-directors, it would be difficult to overstate the unique position Nolan has crafted for himself among his contemporaries. Belonging to a prestigious group of creatives whose commercial and critical achievements are so undeniable that they're able to secure funding for almost any idea they could have. Luckily, at least for the wallets of studio executives, his films also reliably appeal to a huge mainstream audience. His latest film, Oppenheimer, received universal critical acclaim and as many as 7 Academy Awards, in a landmark sweep many believe to be long overdue for the British-American filmmaker. Unlike his friend and peer Zac Snyder, Nolan has repeatedly demonstrated that his own creative properties can be just as successful with both audiences and critics as his adaptations of pre-existing franchises, at least with the exception of Tenet, Nolan's 11th film and easily the most divisive in his catalogue.
Look in my eyes.
Not without its fair share of captivating action set pieces and at least initially interesting explorations of sci-fi concepts, the film is not what I would describe as unfettered dog shit, even if it sometimes does come very close. Even at his worst, Nolan remains a competent and intentioned filmmaker, operating on a scale of production I still can't quite comprehend. I remain consistently impressed by his commitment to outdoing his biggest and most spectacular action set pieces, as opposed to taking the same shortcuts that have become common practice in high-budget action cinema.
Hoyter and his team were able to get the camera absolutely everywhere that I could conceive of. We had such fun with them, we were just using them as if they were any old camera.
They're like kids. They're like, we're just,
Chris is really great in that he wants it for real. He wants it in camera. He doesn't want to do CG.
I'm hoping to give them a reason for reapproaching action cinema.
The script is just as it's been frequently described, a self-flating parody of Christopher Nolan's most obnoxious trademarks.
Inner doors revert to factory settings. Unpickable locks. It's child's play, really.
You got some.
Not gonna like it.
You want to crash a plane.
But not from the air.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
While his obsession with time is now more present than ever before, this film appears to be equally obsessive about the significantly less profound concepts of palindromes.
A lot of Tenet is constructed like the title as a palindrome, so reads the same forwards and backwards.
And inverted entropy.
If the popcorn kernel itself was running in a different direction of time, it can come up into the hand. In the film, we posit that's because its entropy has been reversed.
Although the script's most significant issues lie deep in its principal foundations, specifically its story and structure, things aren't much better on the surface.
Pissing in the wind.
When the algorithm can change the direction of that wind, it can invert the entropy of the world.
If that happens.
Oh.
When Nolan himself proudly admits that the concepts he spends such a significant proportion of the film explaining are not supposed to be understood.
Do you understand everything in Tenet?
You're not meant to understand everything in Tenet. It's not all comprehensible.
And the characters fail to make you care about anything else.
He threatened me with police, prison, the works. The drawing is his hold over me. He brought the trappings of a king. We both know you're a grubby little man playing power games with a wife who doesn't love you anymore.
You seem spirited today. I've always had instincts about the future.
There comes a point where Tenet can no longer retain its audience's emotional investment.
Tenet was an incredible experience. I'm just curious where you were on that movie.
I think I need to see it again.
With subtitles?
Yeah. I think I need to see it again. But even that sounds like a cop-out chicken shit answer. All right. And it is. All right.
One of Christopher Nolan's greatest strengths as a writer is his unique approach to exploring themes, typically through the lens of complex semi-scientific concepts unorthodox narrative structures, and flawed archetypal characters. These characters can typically be summarized as varyingly complex vessels for the audience, possessing relatable characteristics in unrelatable environments. The incomprehensible nature of the universe of Tenet is largely to blame for why its characters fail to draw any empathy from the viewer, although an equal share of the blame can be placed on the fact that they can only be defined as characters by technicality. While the acting in the film is largely passable, Kenneth Branagh's performance as a sociopathic Russian warlord and abusive husband is genuinely a career worst.
Look at me! And understand, you don't negotiate with a tiger. You admire a tiger.
No amount of RADA training can distract from the horrendous miscasting on display here.
And you feel it's true fucking nature!
How Christopher Nolan could think a character so stereotypical and laughably inauthentic would make for a compelling antagonist, I'm not sure I'll ever understand. His introduction is in large part to blame for Tenet's biggest failure, its complete lack of stakes or reason to give a shit about anything that happens.
If I can't have you, no one else can.
Tenet's dialogue is repeatedly plagued by a lethal combination of the writer-director's most basic attempts at characterization and his clunkiest, most convoluted exposition. Of course, films in the action genre regularly position character as secondary to plot, and this is not inherently a problem, providing they can establish legitimate stakes and sustain our investment for, in this case, 2.5 hours.
2 weeks ago, the same day as the Kiev Opera siege, we spotted a detonation in northern Siberia. Sater emerged from this blank spot on the map with ambition and enough money to buy his way into the British establishment. Save the world, then we'll balance the books. Can I recommend a tailor?
Nolan has proven he understands how to evoke suspense through carefully plotted, high-stakes action sequences, and I would assert that his capabilities as an action director have only continued to expand since the early 2000s. But as the plot chugs along and the characters continue to lack any defining traits or even distinctly human characteristics, where does Nolan turn to establish a sense of stakes and reinforce our investment in the action and suspense?
Everyone and everything that's ever lived, destroyed instantly. Precise enough?
Including my son.
The last trick up his sleeve comes in the form of Elizabeth Debicki's faceless child, because that very same technique worked once before.
The scene where the protagonist holds his hand over the inverted bullet and it jumps up to his hand. You made it happen. Whether or not you drop the bullet, whether or not the bullet flies up to your hand, it has to be your hand, it has to be your will that's making it happen.
At least Nolan knew how poor the writing in Tenet was and how convoluted, even boring most of these concepts were when presented in this way. Much of the dialogue is completely indecipherable in the film's overblown audio mix.
What do you propose? What do you know about opera? 241 on War Warhead. Surface at the Opera House, the East in Kiev on the 14th.
When Nolan has now admitted that the dialogue, story, and characters in his film are entirely superfluous, you can understand why fans' only remaining defense of Tenet is that it's just supposed to be a vibes movie. With all that said, I wish Christopher Nolan had worked with a writing partner, or maybe tried to get some honest feedback on the script from anyone other than the people who allowed him to think this was ready to go into production. Trying to find another positive thing to say about Tenet, the film is at least a rare instance of an original concept in the mega-budget Hollywood landscape, which feels like it came, for better or worse, from one mind. Unfortunately, the result is one of several notorious instances of a film with a budget this high where the main issue is not that there was too much interference from the studio, otherwise known as collaboration, but that there wasn't enough to rein Nolan in and allow him to channel his indisputable talent as a director. 4 out of 10. It's somewhat unfair to include Christopher Nolan's first feature film, Following, lasting only 70 minutes and made for just $6,000, on a list of productions with budgets ranging from $9 to $250 million. For all its limitations, Following is an entertaining, Hitchcock-inspired neo-noir thriller, with an engaging, if not slightly film student-esque central hook in its plot, following a writer who begins following strangers to find inspiration for his work.
So you followed women?
I followed anybody. I just wanted to see
where they went, what they did. You would never follow the same person twice. That was the most important rule. That was the one that I broke first. That's when the trouble started.
There's a distinct charm to seeing arguably the biggest director today at both his most restricted and inexperienced. Captured in 16mm black and white, containing a hyper-naturalistic dialogue style and a meta-narrative about a writer, film students would rightly be mocked for pitching something like this in the current year.
I wrote Following at a time when I was living in the middle of London, much like the protagonist, and I became interested in the idea of what happens if a character were to decide to break down the normal protocols that exist between people. What if he were to just choose somebody at random from the crowd and start investigating their life for no reason.
The performances, scene blocking and cinematography are in no way exceptional, but it's impressive how focused and polished the film is given the circumstances of its production, bearing in mind how much responsibility lay with one person working with close to zero money. The reason Following excels where the majority of no-budget features fall short is not because of the director's obvious talent, but his attention to detail, in areas that even more seasoned filmmakers working on a much larger scale can often neglect.
There are a lot of things in it that I'm very proud of. I'm particularly proud of the performances that the actors gave, because we had to shoot the film really doing everything on a first or second take. So they had to be extremely well prepared, and we'd rehearsed every scene of the film like a stage play, so we could go into a location and just get a scene done. Really, I think the cast did an incredible job.
His decision to take this film to the States for distribution was an intelligent one, enabled only by his dual citizenship, giving Nolan a clear edge over other amateur UK filmmakers from this period. Still, it's clear why producers would afford someone able to produce an above-average feature film for just a few $1,000s the opportunity to make something with a real production budget.
A lot of people saw it just on tape. I mean, we were distributed through Zeitgeist in North America and various other territories in the world. The nice thing is it's a film that, unlike Memento actually, it's a film that plays well on tape.
Following is easily the most minimalistic narrative Nolan would ever attempt, due far more to the previously discussed limitations of its production than his inclinations as a filmmaker. The success of a film like this is reliant almost entirely on the strength of its writing. This is a film designed to make you reflect on aspects of your own life with a refreshed perspective, and relies on its viewers becoming so lost in the story and visual style that they're able to forgive its technical shortcomings.
What the hell did you do that for? It's like a diary. They hide it, but actually they want someone to see it. That's what I do. Breaking in, entering someone's life, finding out who they really are. I mean, don't you just feel it? Standing here, drinking their wine, people we'll never even meet.
Given that Nolan was able to create a better film than something made with 34,167 times this budget, shooting every Saturday for a year alongside a full-time job, I would say Nolan definitely succeeded in this. While the intriguing setup of Following is in many ways its greatest asset, the so-called hyper-reality Nolan is attempting to create is ultimately undermined by its amateur performances and the contrivances of later plot points, which speak to the story's underlying lack of depth.
He's going to hang on to the stuff, pretend to sell it, give me some money, may even get most of it back if you're lucky. And I wouldn't wait for your panties either. He's too embarrassed to give those back to you. Shit.
Nevertheless, this film should be a source of inspiration for any aspiring writer-directors, and if you fit into that category, Following is probably worth a watch. 5 out of 10. Though Insomnia is technically the least slept-on film in Nolan's catalogue, I would guess it's probably the very last film anyone would mention when listing off everything he's made. Al Pacino plays a detective who, after the murder of a young woman, is brought to a town in Alaska where the sun never goes down.
It's 10 o'clock, Detective Dormer.
You bet.
At night.
Oh.
Haunted by guilt and trauma from his career as a corrupt homicide detective, and the ever-present daylight of this new environment, he begins to suffer from insomnia.
Don't worry, Will. You can sleep when you're dead.
In a way, the film's most interesting element is its casting. Pacino's performance is obviously not one of his most notable, but even at the time of this film's release, that would have been quite a remarkable achievement.
No, I don't want this turning up in some courtroom 6 months from now when my rep's in the shit. They're pulling apart all my cases.
Come on, Will, that's bullshit.
Fuck you, care!
Though he at no point becomes a distraction, particular moments maybe don't have the emotional poignancy that more subtle character actors could have brought to the table.
This is the spot where your best friend's naked body was dumped, wrapped up in garbage bags!
Similarly, Robin Williams plays the antagonist, but actually gives a surprisingly reserved and nuanced performance that's unlike anything else he ever did in his career.
I kissed her and got a little excited. She started laughing at me. You ever had somebody laugh at you when you're like that? Well, I mean, when you're really vulnerable. Laughing their ass off at you. And then, I hit her. A couple of times, just to stop her, let her know. She starts screaming. She wouldn't stop, If I put my hand over her mouth. And then everything was clear. You and I share a secret. We know how easy it is to kill somebody.
Insomnia is an adaptation of a 1997 Norwegian film of the same name, as well as the only feature Nolan has directed without also holding a writing credit. I think a consequence of operating more as a director for hire than the visionary auteur-filmmaker he would go on to be regarded as, results in a film that feels disposable among the highly oversaturated genre of detective thrillers. Outside of its overabundance of cuts, the technical components of this film are equally competent, and the film's setting is a refreshing, if only slight deviation from what we've come to expect from standard entries in the genre. But besides Robin Williams' character and a chase scene involving logs and water, it's not a particularly memorable cinematic experience, at least not for me. As a result, it was never a film I had a genuine desire to return to, but one that I'm at least able to appreciate for what it is, piquing my curiosity enough to at least be interested in the original film, which I still haven't seen. 6 out of 10. Oppenheimer is a mixed experience, containing more than a handful of genuinely astounding moments, contrasted by scenes upon scenes of forgettable fluff that feels like a melodramatic history lesson with a colossally high budget.
3 years, 4,000 people, $2 billion. If it doesn't go off, we're both finished.
At 3 hours, the final cut feels bloated to say the least. The outstanding work of these editors is undoubtedly what keeps a film with so many characters and superfluous plot threads feeling remarkably focused, but they were ultimately handicapped by Nolan's decision to frame the second half of this film around Oppenheimer's court hearings. A slower, at times deflated conclusion to a story which inherently seemed like the perfect fit for a big screen adaptation. The first half of the film, though too long, is quite remarkable. The performances, the shot choices, the way it captures the weight of its subject matter, Oppenheimer deserves extensive praise for more than just its technical proficiency.
To show the idea of quantum physics, the atom, this sort of vibrating energy within matter, that finds its final expression in the atomic bomb. Certainly the most complicated imagery to achieve in the film.
With the release and success of this film, Nolan really has become the closest thing we have to a modern-day Steven Spielberg, despite the fact that he's still alive and well. At risk of repeating myself, my issues with this film come down to Nolan's choices in the pre-production phase. His obsession with narrative unorthodoxy seems to have blinded him to the effectiveness of traditional structure, which could have allowed Oppenheimer's interactions with secondary and tertiary characters to play out in a more dramatically satisfying way.
We need a systematic destruction of Oppenheimer's credibility so he can never again speak on matters of national security. A simple, bureaucratic procedure, his Q clearance, is up for renewal. You send your accusations to the FBI. You write up an indictment. You tell Oppenheimer his security clearance is not being renewed. No audience, no reporters, no burden of proof.
No burden of proof.
We're not convicted.
Ultimately, I didn't care what happened to Oppenheimer, and I was far more interested in the implications of his actions. I believe the deployment of the atom bomb should have been reserved for the last 30 minutes of a much smaller film. The result of this change may have been a less unique and more conventional experience than we received, but the narrative risks Nolan took were, in my opinion, a mistake. This is a particularly subjective point, and given the film's indisputable success, I'm clearly in the minority.
You told me I'd be okay.
Yeah, well, I didn't have all the facts, did I?
Here's the fact. President Eisenhower pinned the Medal of Freedom on my chest last year.
Robert Downey Jr. gave a nuanced and convincing performance, but the framing and reveal of his sinister motivations to ruin Oppenheimer's life lacked substance.
You know he's never once said that he regrets Hiroshima? He'd do it all over. Why?
Again, there's no reason that every film should have to follow a conventional 3-act structure, but when your midpoint is actually the film's dramatic climax, even the greatest director in the world would need a flawless script to justify the length of what follows. Instead, this highly sentimentalized portrayal of the life and greatness of Oppenheimer, contrasted by the misguided but evil motivations of Lewis Strauss, reminded me of everything I dislike about Steven Spielberg films.
I left the party 16 years ago.
But
17 years ago. My mistake.
But you said...
Sorry, 18. 18 years ago. It's your question. It's not properly phrased.
6 out of 10. As far as superhero origin movies go, you could do a lot worse than Batman Begins.
Your parents' death was not your fault. It was your father's. Yield. You haven't beaten me. You have sacrificed sure footing for a killing stroke.
The success of this film stemmed entirely from the context of its release and the execution of its atypically dark tone.
Would you like to see my mask?
They scream and they cry. It's just your day now.
Well, he's not faking.
So the film is sometimes goofy, but no one can deny that Nolan, a relatively unknown and untested filmmaker at the time, was able to rise to the task of taking a pre-existing character that had become a pop culture pleb and turning him back into someone that people could take as seriously as you could ever take a character like this.
$5 million.
That's a utility belt, not a money belt. $6 million.
$7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
To do so, he tackled the franchise with the ambition to ground Batman in reality, or at least as close as he could get without sacrificing everything people recognise from the source material.
He was a farmer, and he tried to take his neighbor's land and became a murderer. Now he is a prisoner.
What'll happen to him?
Justice. Crime cannot be tolerated.
I'm not sure anyone could have predicted the heights Nolan's filmmaking would reach in subsequent years, but for Warner Brothers to have trusted him with not just this property, but with such a degree of creative control, should continue to be a reminder to large studios of what their restrictive practices may be squandering.
We're here on the black carpet for the premiere of Batman Begins. As you can see, I'm totally prepared for it, although I thought you guys were going to get me the shirt with the built-in abs. There you go.
You can't put that thing on without feeling like a predator.
And did you become kind of nocturnal in character?
I've always been nocturnal.
Shallow character writing, a basic story, and one glaringly bad performance are the most significant elements holding Batman Begins back, as well as the fact that it feels like it has the least to say thematically of all the entries in the trilogy.
Don't come down here with your anger. This is a world you never understand, and you always fear. But you don't understand. In the joint, Chill told me about the night he killed your parents. He said your father begged for mercy. Begged. Like a dog.
A lot of this film feels more interested in being cool than digging deep into the psychology of its characters. But even for the audiences interested in just pure entertainment and action, it still sits at the bottom of the trilogy. Again, Christopher Nolan had not yet experienced the challenges of directing a film on this scale, and that becomes most clear in the larger set pieces of the film's final act, with editing and shot choices that result in a slightly incoherent and unsatisfying climax.
You never learn to mind your surroundings. I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
Despite the various criticisms I have with Nolan's direction and the film's basic hero's journey narrative structure, I would be lying if I said I didn't think this film was the coolest thing ever as a kid, containing multiple shots and sequences that have always stuck with me for the right reasons.
And throttle up, this will boost you into a rampless jump. So what do you think? Does it come in black?
Unfortunately, there are also a number of shots, sequences, and an entire character which completely drag down the experience of this 2-hour and 20-minute film to a still slightly above average superhero affair. No one came into this looking for a complex, lifelong romance in the vein of Peter Parker and Mary Jane in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. But that doesn't mean it couldn't have necessarily worked to the benefit of this story. The problem is not just the horrendous performance of Katie Holmes, but almost everything else about her character.
What are you doing?
Just swimming. Wow, it is good to see you.
You were gone a long time. Job's getting worse.
Can't change the world on your own.
What choice do I have? When you're too busy swimming. But it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you. You could die. At least tell me your name.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Bruce?
I think it would be fair to say Christian Bale and Katie Holmes' interactions were poorly written and subsequently directed, but it's no less fair to say that all of Katie Holmes' performances, in every film she's ever done, were poorly acted.
We're gonna see you guys in a week or something, aren't we? 2 weeks? Thanks, Joe.
6 out of 10. The Dark Knight Rises was the hugely anticipated conclusion to a trilogy many people still regard as one of the greatest of all time.
You might have the wrong animal there, sir.
Unfortunately, in spite of the director's fascination with the concept, time has not been kind to this film, even if people had their fair share of criticisms when The Dark Knight Rises was released 12 years ago.
So I just got back from the midnight showing of Batman 3, Dark Knight Rise. Now I have to go try to sleep after seeing such an awful, awful movie. But, you know, that's life, I guess. Sometimes movies are just terrible like that. Horrible. It's trash.
Given its much broader scope and grander ambitions, there are objectively more fundamental issues with this film than with Batman Begins. But for myself, there are equally more things to like.
I fear dying in here while my city burns. Then make the climb.
First and foremost, I'm glad Nolan decided to take a risk by shifting genres for a second time, while still making a concerted attempt to maintain the integrity of his universe.
Death or exile?
Frank, if you think we're going out onto that ice willingly, you have another thing coming.
Very well. Death by exile.
As a conclusion to this trilogy and the titular character's arc, I think this film is more than successful, and the last 10 minutes are among Nolan's most dramatic and satisfying.
I had this fantasy that I would look across the tables and I'd see you there with a wife, maybe a couple of kids. I always knew there was nothing here for you except pain and tragedy, and I wanted something more for you than that.
My main issue with this film is, rather unsurprisingly, its numerous subplots.
You showed up this one day, in a cool car, pretty girl on your arm. We were so excited. Bruce Wayne, billionaire orphan. I mean, we used to make up stories about you, man. Might be time to get some fresh air, start paying attention to the details. Some of those details might need your help.
The film is hugely oversaturated with content, and while Nolan tries to utilise its trifecta of new side characters towards the exploration of the film's greater themes, these storylines eventually clutter the narrative and work against each other.
Selina Kyle. She's good, but the ground is shrinking beneath her feet.
Fascinating. You two should exchange notes over coffee.
So now you're trying to set me up with a jewel thief.
At this point, I'd set you up with a chimpanzee if it brought you back to the world.
This isn't an ensemble film and for the most part remains focused on the main character in his fight against the antagonist, which is probably why the film doesn't have the time to develop these characters into anything interesting, although they don't exactly utilise the time that they have. Catwoman, Talia al Ghul and Joseph Robin-Levitt feel like superfluous glorified plot devices for the majority of the film's runtime.
Talia, I climbed out of the pit. I found my father. Until you murdered him.
He was trying to kill millions of innocent people.
Innocent is a strong word to throw around Gotham, Bruce.
Without denying the talent of these two actresses, the dialogue they were given is comically cliché, and their performances were at times reminiscent of the Joel Schumacher films.
Cat got your tongue.
You dumb bitch.
Nobody ever accused me of being dumb.
You're dumb.
My father's work is done.
The Dark Knight Rises' apparent antagonist,
A masked man called Bane,
remains compelling right up to the moment he's revealed just to be a henchman for someone else, even if this was always historically his purpose as a character.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. The shadows betray you because they belong to me.
I realise this wasn't the original plan for the third film, and some people take issue with Bane's bizarre voice.
A lot of loyalty for a hired gun!
Or perhaps he's wondering why someone would shoot a man before throwing him out of a plane.
If I pull that off, will you die?
It would be extremely painful.
You're a big guy.
For you.
And many other aspects of his character. He's neither as intimidating nor as compelling as Heath Ledger's Joker, but I'm sure Christopher Nolan and even Tom Hardy were aware that just trying to outdo that character would not have ended well. I think the action sequences are some of the strongest aspects of the film, and comparing the bigger set pieces to their closest counterparts in Batman Begins is like night and day. The only exception to this for me is the final and possibly the most important and climactic action sequence of the entire film, the final fight between Batman and Bane. I can't help but think that a man in an armoured gimp suit wearing a mask fighting a bald man also wearing a mask should have been recognised as a monumentally dumb visual long before the final shooting script.
Your city. No. I came back to stop you.
In the end, it's strange to look back on a trilogy that I once thought was the best of the best, only to realise that 2 out of the 3 films are just pretty decent.
I'll look into it.
6 out of 10. Interstellar should be one of my favourite Christopher Nolan films in the context of the themes and concepts it's exploring.
I've been waiting for a science fiction film like this for absolutely years, so it's going to be visually and orally spectacular.
The film takes huge inspiration from 2001: A Space Odyssey, with a more conventional, emotionally centred exploration of many of the same ideas. Christopher Nolan was nonetheless able to create a visual and cinematic spectacle, much like the at the time recent release of Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity. Unlike that film, Interstellar actually had something to say.
The initial impetus for the project had been to say, why not examine real possibilities? Why not actually look at the real science there?
The warping of space inside here scatters some of it back.
flag scattering off of the surface of a rippled ocean.
Kip is the foremost authority on all things gravitational.
Neither wormholes nor black holes have been depicted in any Hollywood movie in the way that they actually would appear.
The collaboration has produced visualization of things which nobody had ever managed to do before.
We're going to write several technical papers about this. One aimed at the astrophysics community, and then something for the computer graphics community. Here are some things that we've discovered about gravitational lensing by rapidly spinning black holes that we never knew before.
Nevertheless, I think this was the first film that really exposed Nolan's weaknesses as a writer to me.
Make him stay, Murph. Make him stay, Murph. Don't let me leave, Murph. Don't let me leave, Murph. No! 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 No!
I remain astounded by how many people regard this film as a masterpiece, despite some genuinely powerful and visually striking scenes in the third act.
I'm gonna find a way to tell Murph, just like I found this moment. It's just like Gran said. My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable. It's the key.
What are we here to do?
Fucking right in the pussy!
Despite McConaughey's outstanding performance, this was also easily the least memorable protagonist Nolan had created up to this point in his career, and perhaps more so than any other protagonist outside of the protagonist, feels like a blank vessel for the audience to inhabit.
Today I'm the age you were when you left. This might be a real good time for you to come back.
It marks a stark shift in the writer-director's focus, away from character and into the embrace of cinema spectacle, a principle which would continue and ultimately fall apart several films later, with Tenet.
I ran into Chris somewhere, and would I give him one day and just write him a piece of music? And this letter arrived. And it was very much about this young man, actually, and my relationship with him. This young man, Jake Zimmer, wants to be a scientist. Well, he is a scientist. And so I wrote that piece, and then of course Chris did a switch on me, and of course it turns out to be a daughter in the movie.
Characterization is executed first and foremost through choice and action, but without nuanced, poignant dialogue, we are left with a bland cast of characters that don't feel worth investing in right up to the point of their demise.
Hello, Rob?
I've waited years.
How many years?
4 months, 8 days.
Why didn't you sleep?
Oh, I had a couple of stretches. I stopped believing you were coming back.
Interstellar in concept is also quite scary, or at least it probably should be. Of course, it's not attempting to be a horror film or even an action film, but a sort of existential sci-fi epic. Unless you can count the hollowness of its side characters and the way that they're eliminated one by one because of their own hubris as unique tropes of the horror genre.
Very graceful. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Go, 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 go. 7 years per hour here. Let's make it count.
The waves.
I got it! Get your ass back to the Ranger now!
The central premise is one that begs introspection. There is an almost cold, airy touch to Nolan's direction that can at times make it difficult to remain present in the on-screen conflict, despite a number of expertly edited and legitimately suspenseful action sequences with unimaginably terrifying consequences.
Everybody ready to say goodbye to our solar system?
Everyone who successfully engages with Interstellar will, by design, imagine themselves being faced with the same central choice as the protagonist, whether the pursuit of a world for your children to grow up in is worth not being around to see it.
When I'm up there in hypersleep, or traveling near the speed of light, or near a black hole, time's gonna change for me. And it's gonna run more slowly. I mean, by the time I get back, we might even be the same age. You and me. What? Imagine that. Ah, Murph.
You have no idea when you're coming back.
no idea. Oh!
The film also reminds me of Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, where the plotting of the first two acts ultimately feels superfluous by the time you reach the conclusion.
Now that's a proper introduction.
However, the end result is a film designed to make you reflect on a profound aspect of your own existence, and that is absolutely a mark of success for the final act.
The last act makes a film. Wow them in the end. You got a hit. You can have flaws, problems, but wow them in the end, and you've got a hit. Find an ending, but don't cheat, and don't you dare bring in a Deus Ex Machina.
6 out of 10. The Prestige is a film about tricks.
Illusion, Michael. Trick is something a whore does for money.
This is perhaps the most intricate narrative Nolan and Nolan had written up to this point in their career, and probably also the biggest risk they'd taken.
It took a long time for my brother and myself to write the script, to figure out from this sprawling book that has so many possibilities in it, to figure out what the movie was, and we've been working on it for 5 or 6 years really.
Focusing on a central rivalry without fully committing to the perspective of either side can be an extremely challenging game of balance for filmmakers. But when a writer and director are able to organically develop our investment in the competing characters' conflicting actions and motivations, this can produce an unparalleled thrust for the film's dramatic momentum.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first trick of the evening is one that involves considerable risk.
The Prestige moves at a near perfect pace and is more than successful in its execution of this central paradigm, continuing to shift our empathy in either direction as the actions of both Jackman and Bale escalate in surprising and sometimes shocking ways.
Total devotion to his art. Not a self-sacrifice. You know?
At least at first, the Prestige's presentation bears many similarities with the visual style of Batman Begins, Nolan's previous film.
What you're about to see is considered safe. I apologize.
Wanting to stay close to home, Nolan and the crew made the decision to shoot the film on the streets of Los Angeles, confident that the architecture was close enough to 1906 London to come across as authentic. But with its predominantly handheld cinematography, this is not what you might expect for a period piece, and sometimes feels less methodical than the pace and intricacy of the narrative deserves.
His sets always look so wonderful and so real that I can put the camera 6 inches away from a set wall and I know it's going to hold up on the big screen. His sets always allow me to light them in a dark, moody fashion. The material that Chris writes and the way he wants a picture to look and the way I light all sort of works together.
Wally Pfister shot all of Christopher Nolan's films from Memento through to The Dark Knight Rises, and his explanation of the creative and practical decisions they took during the production of this film were enlightening to read. There are numerous intentional exceptions to the use of handheld cameras, and the blocking, composition and editing choices combine in these particular sequences to evoke a certain gravitas or prestige.
I must leave you, Borden. Yes, you, Borden. Sitting there in your cell, reading my diary, awaiting your death.
For me, The Prestige is very much about filmmaking. It's very much about what I do. It's also intended to suggest to the audience some of those ideas about how the film itself is spooling its narrative out to the audience.
I've always loved the opening shot of this film in particular, and I think it's uniquely symbolic in representing the mystery and later appreciation of the Prestige's most fundamental secrets.
Did you pepper it with enough things so that once you kind of know all the secrets, you can enjoy it the second time seeing them coming?
For people seeing it again, if they care to go back and see it again, they'll find that there were all kinds of clues, and we played very fair and we're very honest about our deceptions, if that makes sense.
The fluidity of the film's visual direction is consequently one of its strongest assets, and works in conjunction with the two excellent lead performances to elevate the material and create a visceral, palpable rivalry between the two protagonists.
So it must have been nice to be able to bring, actors that you had already worked with and could count on. How did you fit Hugh into that mix? Did you guys torment him and haze him and make him part of the family?
No, I mean, Hugh is such a gentleman and he's such a pleasure to work with.
And these two actors really get to go at each other in the movie. Did you encourage any sort of friendly competition between the two of them?
No, I think they actually got on very well.
Knowing that you had already worked with Christian as Batman, was it tempting to bring in another guy who had played a superhero, or was it almost like, should we do this? Was it going to be...
You know, it really didn't enter into my thinking, to be honest.
Like always, there are subplots in this film that should have been condensed or perhaps just presented in a different way.
Couldn't you have found a softer one?
Well, it's not for sleeping on.
At this point, I'm convinced that the only kind of romance story Nolan knows how to write is a tragic one. 7 out of 10. Even after Oppenheimer, I think Dunkirk still stands out as the most different among the films Christopher Nolan has directed. Dunkirk is a gripping cinematic experience, consisting of numerous suspenseful action sequences with increasing implications for the greater conflict. It's simultaneously straightforward and highly complex, and to me is the best thing Nolan has made for quite some time now. The film is a directing and editing showcase, and unlike many of Nolan's other works, cannot be weighed down by its plot because it doesn't really have one. Of course, Dunkirk actually has multiple stories taking place within the Dunkirk evacuation of World War II, but with the exception of one or two choices, tends to steer away from Nolan's melodramatic tendencies for an almost purist showcase of suspense.
I'm not going back. I'm not going back. Turn it around.
I'm not turning around.
Turn it around! Calm it down, mate! Turn it around! Calm it down, mate!
It would do a disservice to his capabilities as a writer to say that this film was Nolan playing to his strengths, but the lack of expository dialogue or central character arc is what allowed his skills as a director to really breathe. As evoked through the slow-falling, dreamlike shower of debris, Dunkirk's opening perfectly captures a moment of calm, before unsuspectingly thrusting the audience into a storm of tension which, except for a small number of purposeful, fleeting moments, continues to build right through to the film's climax.
Come English! Only!
The audio production is genuinely some of the most effective and memorable I can recall for this genre of film, and it's amazing what Nolan can achieve when he's not busy writing masses of indecipherable dialogue to bury underneath it all. On a technical level, I would argue multiple action set pieces in Dunkirk genuinely deserve to be put alongside the opening of Saving Private Ryan as some of the greatest in the genre.
Get off the ship!
What Nolan was able to achieve in terms of both the scale of this production and the authenticity of the film's visual direction is unmatched by his other works.
They know where you were.
Even without many of the elements I typically look for in a film, Dunkirk is outstanding, and I would be perfectly comfortable with someone describing this film as a masterpiece.
I've been getting obsessive about making my top 10 list of the decade, of the 2010s. It was in watching Dunkirk a third time, making my top 10 list, that I think I had it preliminary at 7, and it jumped up to number 2. Wow. I can understand if you guys think that Dark Knight is his apex mountain. To me, this is his apex mountain, because this is where he really dealed himself in, aside from Gotham City. And aside from science fiction and aside from the San Diego Comic-Con crowd, all right, to being a great filmmaker and dealing with a big subject, and brought Warner Brothers along with him in the exact way Stanley Kubrick would have done.
8 out of 10. Memento is a psychological thriller with a famously experimental narrative structure which is fundamental to the themes of the film.
Now, where was I?
The ambition to not only attempt a narrative that plays out in reverse, but to fully commit this to the service of a character study feels like far more than just a gimmick, and is almost enough to make me question what came first, the character or the structure.
Now I know, you fake it. If you think you're supposed to recognize somebody, you just pretend to. You bluff it to get a pat on the head from the doctors. You bluff it to seem less of a freak.
The ability to create something truly unique was clearly a huge source of inspiration to Nolan, off the back of Following, with the funding to allow him to make exactly what he'd always envisioned.
Hi. Hi. I'm Mr. Shelby from 304.
Right, what can I do for you, Leonard?
If I seem a little strange or rude or something, I've told you this before, haven't I?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to mess with you, but...
As an aspiring writer and filmmaker, the film is a genuine source of inspiration to me, and really showcases why Christopher and Jonathan Nolan worked so well as a writing partnership.
What are you, Pocahontas? Come on. Oh, fuck this.
You're gonna pay for what you did.
You don't have a clue, you freak.
Beg my wife's forgiveness before I blow your brains out.
I believe experimentation is the only source of legitimate creativity, and to this day I still can't think of a film quite like Memento. Of course, it's not the only film to have ever played out in reverse, but to do so in this way, crafting a mysterious, mentally afflicted protagonist in an even more confusing reality, only able to remember things from the last 2 minutes, takes a handle of the craft of screenwriting that more closely resembles a mathematician.
Best way to draw it is as a hairpin, like that. That's basically the end of the movie. This stuff is the black and white stuff. This is color, and this is running backwards as a series of jumps. And what we do is we cut between the two the whole way through. So we alternate scene here, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, and they meet towards the end of the film. But then within this, you have flashbacks to a different timeline, which is actually even earlier, somewhere around there. Also within this, you have flashbacks to an earlier time, also somewhere within there.
The human element of this film comes from Guy Pearce's Leonard and his neurological disposition, as well as the naivety of his ever-resetting inner monologue, repeatedly rediscovering the hyper-paranoid array of messages he's left for himself across his own body.
You say we talked before? I don't remember that. Yeah, but it's not amnesia. I remember everything up until my injury. I just can't make new memories. Disciplined and organized. I use habit and routine to make my life possible. Sammy had no drive, no reason to make it work. Me? Yeah. I got a reason.
There is also the other storyline of Memento playing out chronologically and in black and white, depicting the events leading up to the end of the main plot, which is actually the beginning if it wasn't playing out in reverse order.
You really need a system if you're gonna make it work. You kind of learn to trust your own handwriting. That becomes an important part of your life. If you have a piece of information which is vital, writing on your body instead of on a piece of paper can be the answer.
It could fairly be assumed that the same criticisms many have of Tenet could also be applied to Memento.
I have a tendency to remember, if I see a film and I remember it 6 months later, I tend to remember it reversed.
Nevertheless, the intrigue of Memento's plot is grounded in a more subtly heightened reality, and the nature of this type of psychological mystery thriller encourages a dialogue style where I think Nolan really excels. Compared to everything he would go on to make, this film is also uniquely mature for Nolan, both in its subject matter and its language.
I can say whatever the fuck I want, and you won't remember.
Baby, your cunt of a fucking wife sucked one too many diseased cocks and turned you into a fucking retard.
Stay focused. Find a pen. Come on, find write down what happened. Write it down. Write it down. Come on, concentrate. What happened?
What does it look like? He beat the shit out of me.
Who?
Who?
It's obvious Nolan had a comprehensive understanding of the motivations of these characters, which allows the restraint with which information is revealed to create a carefully calculated series of setups and payoffs throughout the narrative.
Do I know this guy? He seems to know me.
What the fuck?
Cinematically, I've always appreciated the film's visual style. There is never a shot or a blocking choice that disrupts the immersion of this experience. Of course, the film wasn't shot with the same budget or equipment that Nolan's future films would go on to have, but Memento's gritty presentation is perfectly suited to this story.
Can I just let myself forget what you've made me do?
I would be hard-pressed to think of a list of things that would improve Memento. As I've aged, psychological thrillers remain entertaining as ever, but typically fall short of having the lasting emotional impact that could rival my favourite films from other genres. Nevertheless, this is an incredible film, and one that I would recommend to anyone old enough to listen to language like this.
The guy that cracked your skull and fucked your wife?
What the fuck are you talking about?
I don't know.
Your cunt of a fucking wife!
8 out of 10. Inception is the film that proved Christopher Nolan as not just a highly capable director, but as a prolific and visionary creator, capable of a feat that very few filmmakers in recent memory have been able to achieve. Overwhelming financial and critical success from an original concept developed for the screen. It's astounding that Inception has not yet spawned any sequels, which speaks to the integrity of its creator, given the state of these other sci-fi franchises that were milked to death within just a few years. In terms of the narrative, this may be the most compelling that the writer-director has ever produced. The rules of this world are introduced in visually striking and dramatic, sometimes even horrifying sequences.
Bookstore, cafe, almost everything else is here too.
Who are the people?
Projections of my subconscious.
It's yours?
Yes. Remember, you are the dreamer. You build this world.
Please. Mind telling your subconscious to take it easy?
It's my subconscious. Remember, I can't control it.
Oh, God! Let me go! Let me go! God! Wake me up! Wake me up! Wake me up! Wake me up!
The same negative sentiments that many people, myself included, would go on to take away from Tenet, were first shared by those who believed Inception was an incomprehensible mess at the time of its release. Given that I was only 13 years old at the time, much of Inception was a completely incoherent experience for me.
Sometimes thoughts of my dead wife manifest themselves as trains!
Are you all saying that you can go into a dream and take people in that dream into their own dreams?
Not all the time, just this once, and maybe one other time. It's so complex and cool!
Regardless, I still very much enjoyed the film. The reason for this is the way that it's able to draw you in with these immediately relatable concepts through captivating cinematic set pieces, and then to provide you a reason to care in the form of Leonardo DiCaprio's protagonist and his central motivation of getting back to his children.
You're waiting for a train. A train that'll take you far away.
This balancing act between thoughtful psychological drama and high-octane action thriller may have led to particular aspects feeling watered down, and will no doubt dissuade many from viewing the film as high art. But as a blockbuster movie, Inception is more consistently entertaining and more thoughtful and thrilling than almost anything else out there.
Don't lose yourself!
I will!
One repeated criticism that cannot be levelled at this film is lack of depth. An assortment of breathtaking, dumbfounding action sequences feed into a narrative with no shortage of meaningful stakes, facilitated by the gradual release of information we are given about DiCaprio's character and the consequences of his earlier actions.
The reason I knew Inception was possible was because I I did it to her first. I did it to my own wife.
Why?
The way that everything comes together at the end results in one of the most iconic, chilling endings of the past 25 years.
Welcome home, Mr. Cop. Thank you, sir.
Eight out of 10. The Dark Knight is widely and uncontroversially cited as both Nolan's greatest cinematic achievement and the best superhero film ever made.
He's a symbol. We don't have to be afraid of scum like you.
Yeah, you do, Brian. You see, this is how crazy Batman's made Gotham.
Unlike the other two films in this trilogy, time has only further reinforced what made The Dark Knight stand out in a sea of high-budget blockbusters and the factory-line production of superhero content we've involuntarily received over the past 2 decades. As a consequence, there's not much left to be said about what I consider to be Christopher Nolan's best film by quite a margin.
Criminals aren't complicated, Alfred. We just need to figure out what he's after.
With respect, Master Wayne, perhaps this is a man you don't fully understand either. Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
The Dark Knight feels like if Michael Mann's Heat banged David Fincher's Seven, and the end product is something that builds off and refines the best elements of those films. As far as I'm concerned, this is about as perfect as an action thriller can get.
Alright, everybody, hands up, heads down! I just said hands up! No!
Here comes the silent alarm. And there it goes. Is it a problem? No, I'm done here.
On the ground! Stay on the ground! Nobody make a move! Nobody! Stay down!
Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
Whether it's Heath Ledger and honestly all of the main cast's incredible performances.
You see, a guy like me,
Freak.
a guy like me. Look, listen. I know why you're afraid to go out at night. The Batman. See, Batman has shown Gotham your true colors, unfortunately. I know the squealers when I see them, and...
Or the prescient cultural and psychosocial themes that have genuine resonance amid the film's tight, breakneck pacing.
Harvey, just in case, I want to tell you something, okay?
Don't think like that, Rachel. They're coming for you.
I know they are, but I don't want them to.
No! No! No, not me! Why are you coming for me? Rachel! Rachel!
Harvey. Okay.
Rachel!
Harvey, it's okay.
The Dark Knight deserves to be recognised as a truly masterful piece of work by a writer-director at the top of his game, working on a scale of production that can so often lead to an end product that feels watered down for the masses.
Jack Nicholson's version of the Joker had become an icon, sort of seminal performance. To find somebody willing to try and redo that in a completely different way, and the inevitable comparisons that would result, that was quite a challenge.
I have no doubt The Dark Knight will continue to be discussed and regarded as Nolan's magnum opus for many years to come, and is surely the pinnacle of what this character is able to offer. 9 out of 10.